I was in the council yard when Egham had its own council, and I was filling sandbags, and I believe war was declared at 11 o'clock, and 3 minutes later the air raid siren went up. Where I was only 5 minutes from home, so I rushed home, and I think we all cowered, not knowing what was going to happen. I was at Strode's Grammar School, and I was there till 1942, and we shared the school with Rains School, which was a school that was evacuated from London. So education was very much almost part-time.
I intended to be a concert violinist, but as the war seemed approaching and I'd passed the civil service exam, I decided not to become a professional violinist, but I would just use my playing as a hobby. And I worked in Bristol as a civil servant. And so in 1939, I was 19.
And when I was old enough, when I was 15 and a half, I went to work on the railways. They offered me a job in the traffic. So I went from the locomotive department to the traffic, and I went into signal boxes. And I went into North Box at Westbury. There was 2 signalmen there and the booking boy. Well, I went in as a booking boy, so you registered all the train movements. There was 125 levers, and it was a 2-man job and a boy.
So I was aged 8 and I just went to school. We practiced with a gas mask and going to the shelters which were prepared. And it was good fun. I took Smarties in case the siren went.
I remember the Sunday when the war was declared and how upset my parents were. Things just developed from then on. Young men were disappearing from town, going off into the armies.
My main job was from Tripoli, which is in Libya, clearing the main road of mines. And I sat in my jeep, and we had some sappers on the flanks with mine detectors. The sapper would come along and feel all round, make sure it was not booby-trapped, lift it, put it to one side. And we did about 4 miles a day clearing mines, all the way into Tunisia.
I landed in Normandy, and from then on it was push against the Germans, who were very strong. And they were not far from home, and they had short lines of communication.
There were only 2 occasions in the war when I can remember being really frightened. And the first was these when I was bicycling along Station Avenue, Walton-on-Thames. There was no one about, there was no traffic, nobody at all. And at that time, at the end of Station Avenue, there was a village green. And across the green, I stopped for some reason. There was a pub on the other side of the green with the doors and windows open. It was Sunday, the 3rd of September, 1939. And I came across this village green from the pub, Chamberlain's announcement that we were at war with Germany.
I am speaking to you from the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
I'd heard, obviously, rumours and talks of war, but to know that war had actually been declared was really frightening, particularly as there was nobody around. I looked around and there wasn't another soul in sight. I looked up in the sky, half expecting to see German aeroplanes, but of course there weren't any.
As I got a bit older, and I became terrified it would finish before I could get into the Navy. I just, which perhaps wasn't very nice of me, but I was very young. I volunteered on my 18th birthday as a driver for the Wrens. And even then I was quite a good driver because I'd been able to practice in my father's garage.
Women didn't work much before the war, you know, only in domestic service, and that, of course, didn't survive after the war. And it's opened the door to equality for women. You know, whether you agree with it or not, I'm afraid you've got to put up with it now.
When you volunteer, rather than being called up, you can choose what job you want. And I wanted to do something mechanical. The first thing I said, I want to be a dog handler. And they said, oh, dear me, no, that's for men. So that scotched that one. I said, well, I want to be a motorbike rider. Oh, dear me, no, that's for men only. So I said, well, just don't put me in the cookhouse. Do whatever you like with me, because I can't think of anything that I can do. So they said, well, we'll put you in the motoring section. And I've learned to drive a car and lorries and all sorts of lovely big things and small things. And I was very happy.
I think joining the WWII taught me far more than I'd ever learned if I hadn't joined. I'd come from a very comfortable, cosy middle-class family. I was well protected. And I learnt the value of people.
Wherever you went, there were a great bunch, you know. You looked after each other and covered up if somebody was late. So I enjoyed that. I loved driving. It was in my blood. I really loved driving.
A lot of people found the war very sad, but then there were sad moments and very happy moments. I didn't want to go into the actual forces, the army or any of those, and I wanted to go and do what I wanted to do, and that was nursing. I went nursing down to Salisbury, and we had all the men back from the camps out in Germany where they were very emaciated and very ill-treated men, very, very sick. So sad. So they were really emaciated. They were happy soldiers. They weren't always begging and asking for help, or they just took it in their stride. They were always grateful. They used to love you to take them to the pictures, and we used to have special passes to go to the pictures with them. Some were a bit miserable, but that was understandable because they had awful wounds, some of them.
There were 2 ambulance trains that we had come through, and they were the old teak stock of the London North Eastern Railway, and they were the old coaches made of teak. And the roofs were painted white with a big red cross on the top of each carriage. And they were coming through on a regular basis. H15 and H16, those are the 2 trains. Hospital 16 and Hospital 15, that's what it meant, H. The H stood for hospital trains, because they had doctors on board, you see, until they could get them to military hospitals, you see.
From Britain's ports, from the bombed towns, the trains took their wounded cargoes to the hospitals. Railway hotels, as well as trains, were taken over for war purposes. Several were converted into hospitals. Here, at Gleneagles Hotel, where travellers from all over the world used to foregather, the sick and wounded were brought back to health.
We used to get some overtime as well to go and help with the loading of these trains. And I've seen American soldiers 3 abreast, a mile of soldiers 3 abreast waiting to get onto troop trains. And you could more or less say a few hours later, perhaps a lot of them would be dead.
I knew there was no other way out. Hitler had had one whole year to withdraw with honor, but he kicked us in the teeth. And we had to declare our loyalty, and that was to the Poles. I didn't think how enormous it was going to be. No, really not. But of course the Germans were terribly well prepared.
There's a huge wire fence between Tunisia and Libya. Must be about 5 meters wide, about that height, and one little post. And we pushed on. And the men were absolutely wonderful. I had 60 men, you see. Not one of them ever flinched to say, pick up that mine. Yes, sir. Go and do it straight away. They were all very well trained to field round it. But the men deserve it, because it was much harder being in the ranks. You just do as you're told, you know. For an officer, you've got something to think about and do things.
I was an apprentice in a machine tool factory. Machine tools are used to produce engines, petrol engines, etc. And that wasn't good enough for me because it was a reserved occupation. And I had to do what I was told by law. I didn't like that. So I managed to get away, and I thought I'll join the army.
I got a transfer from the Pioneer Corps to the Royal Army Medical Corps as a chiropodist. I was the NCO in charge, and I had perhaps 3 or 4 others with me, and we get about 20 or 30 waiting for an ambulance. If they brought the wounded in to us in ambulances, and we were in a room about as big as this, and they'd simply laid their stretchers around the walls. You were in charge of them and supposed to be treating them. You weren't medicing. We were in the medical corps, but like we weren't doctors. Then ambulances started to arrive, and they'd say, well, we'll take one. And you decided who went. The one that had the best chance of recovery.
Someone wrecked me out and said, you can't join the ordinary forces. You've got to be a specialist. And so they made me into a specialist. And of course I had to study treatment of metals, what would happen when we did this, that, and the other, how you'd make things if you had to in a hurry. So you were quite useful.
Very often ambulances came and said, there's no room. We're full. So you got none away then. That really used to upset us, because there was always more than an ambulance load waiting. So we only got sometimes 1 or 2 at a time. So it was a pretty responsible job, really, and could be a bit harrowing.
I tried to be a Christian. I had to sort it out, because how can you be a Christian but be a soldier? It's no good being a dead Christian. You've got to be a live Christian. And what about the other fellow? What's he going to be? It's a question of life and death. And it's all right to have wonderful thoughts about it, but when the chips are down, it's a different matter. Someone's threatening your very life. There's no way of getting out of it.
Alamein was a near run thing, very close run thing. But in the end, the Germans gave in and withdrew. The big attack came on the 23rd. That was tremendous. We waited and waited and waited. No fires, but no smoke, because it might give you a position where we waited. And just lay in the sand until HR came. I remember you sleep on the ground, your troops were all around you. I remember two sappers next to me, one saying to the other, getting dressed. Another nice day, Bill, because it was a nice day every day there, the sun blazing down. Another nice day, Bill, yes. Clear sky and very, very hot. When the barrage started, a terrible noise. And then a certain time up we got with the New Zealanders and started to walk forward on a certain bearing. And the bearing was shown by anti-aircraft guns lowered down. And you could see them flying like this, see the red glow from behind the shell. You just follow that line.
They had a label on them, wounded so-and-so, 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 detail of their wounds. And I decided, or one of my mates decided who went. They were marked 1, 2 and 3, grade 1, grade 2 and grade 3. And according to how you thought what the patient's chance of survival was, they were all marked with those numbers by the medics before they came into us.
When I came to the tank that had broken down or stopped, I had to walk on the side of the road, and the Germans just strewed landmines wherever they went. So you had to be very careful, just like our fellows do today. No. You only lose your legs, that's all you lose. But you don't want to lose your legs.
The most dangerous thing was the German jumping mine, called S-mine. S for shrapnel. It was like a can buried in the soil. You could just see the prong sticking up. It was very clever. Pressed on it, and after 2 seconds it jumped and exploded in another fuse at breast height, throwing out about 100 ball bearings. And that did an awful lot of damage, a lot of casualties for that. 2 of my bosses both went down, killed by those things. And I escaped, very lucky. One mine went off and killed the brigadier who was visiting me, and his full colonel, his deputy, and my boss and a staff officer. And I just moved away to talk to my sergeant, and I got away with it.
I had one chap, a lieutenant colonel, and I should think he was in his 50s. He was very badly wounded, and he just whispered to me, "All I want is to see my grandchildren." I did that all through my active career, worked every night, dealing with wounded soldiers, getting them cleared from their medical inspection setup, getting them cleared from there to hospitals. I'd always wanted to be a doctor, so I was more or less in my element on it. But for anyone who didn't like medicine or didn't like looking after, well, it was looking after dying people, really. Night after night, you did it every night and slept in the day, while you were on active service, which could be quite a long time as a spell. But it was a worthwhile job. You weren't killing people. You were doing your best to save them. route all the time to London, along the Thames, which you could see in the midnight light. So there was their route already, always there for the Germans. The house I lived in actually got hit directly some time after I left, was obliterated. I was working on a big factory on the Thames, which was on a direct route to London from the continent for aircraft. So I saw a lot of what aircraft can do. Of course, we were hit several times.
When bombs fell, and there were a lot of them, we went under we had a big oak dining room table, and we all went under there. It was always the same. Bombs rained down, and we went for cover where there was cover, and then we heard bombs coming down locally. And fortunately it didn't come to us. And then you got out and made a cup of tea and saw if anyone was in danger or needed help, we would go out and help other people.
The actual being bombed was rather strange. It was a feeling of time standing still. We had a Morrison shelter in the dining room, and I was under that, and my mother was under there. My brother and my father were out fire watching and so on. Glass was tinkling down a little at a time, and there was dust up one's nostrils. I suddenly remembered I'd left my violin on top of the Morrison instead of in with me. And I can remember going like this, feeling if it was still there, and luckily it was still there.
I came home one lunchtime and I could hear a sound of a German aircraft. You knew a German aircraft because they were diesel engined, and they went boom, boom, boom. My father and I rushed outside and looked out, and there we saw a German aircraft circling in our area, and the guns were firing at it, but nowhere near the aircraft, and it circled for a few minutes and then flew away.
Germany calling, Germany calling, Germany calling. Here are the Reichs in ambush.
Lord Haw-Haw, if you've heard of Lord Haw-Haw, he worked for the German propaganda people, and he said that if anybody displayed a German aircraft that had been shot down, they would bomb them. At that time, we had a Junkers 88 bomber in our our fire station yard for the public to see. The point being, they were trying to raise money to buy a Spitfire, which at that time was supposed to cost £5,000. That was on the Monday, and on the Friday, a stick of bombs dropped from Egham Meads right over to the Grove, and they were 15 500-pound bombs. One bomb landed on the pavement outside a draper's shop called Arkell's, and the daughter and 2 of the evacuees were killed. There was a lot of things said, oh, the plane was just jettisoning its bombs because fighters were chasing it, or the guns were getting too close. But I don't believe it, because having seen what I'd seen, I think they were doing what they said they would do, and that was if we were displaying a German bomber, they would bomb the area.
Das Gerät 76 ist eine als kleines Flugzeug ausgebildete Fernbombe, gestartet von einem Spezialgeschütz.
There came a time when they sent over doodlebugs, they were called. These were self-propelled, and you heard them. You heard them coming. You could hear them in the dark. You could see them in the light. And then they'd switch themselves off and start wavering about, never quite knowing where they were going to end up. But after that, something worse was rockets, where you had no sound boarding. You just went a big bang. So you had no means of dodging it if it was going to hit you.
We had the V2 rockets, which were quite fearsome because there was absolutely no warning at all. The first one fell in Chiswick, and the government put it out on the news that it had been a gas main had exploded. But all the people there, we knew it had been something that had come. We didn't know what it was at first, and then gradually the word got out that the Germans were using rockets from the coast of France. And of course we all know now, from the Middle East troubles, you know what rocket warfare can be like. Not much to laugh about in it now. You know, it's not easy to live your life without looking forward and planning sort of where you hope to be next year and 5 years. And when you're in a country at war, you can't really do that because you don't know. You don't even know whether you'll wake up alive tomorrow morning.
And I lived in London as a child in St John's Wood. We were, during the war, a centre of what was called a Molotov basket. If the siren went off, you immediately, if you were outside, looked for the nearest tube station. You went as low as you could, so that if a firebomb came, you'd still survive. It's a funny life. It all sounds a bit unreal now.
I can't really remember the word Nazi, but I can remember, you know, just Germans. I mean, it was the Germans that used to fly over us in their aeroplanes and, you know, try and drop bombs on us. One of my big memories is the first time that London was really blitzed. My father picked me up, and normally the sky was black because there was no lighting anywhere, and he picked me up and I could see in the distance It was all ablaze, everything was ablaze, the sky was just orange.
You could see sometimes a huge red glow in the sky, which was when the German bombers had actually got into central London and were bombing around St Paul's Cathedral. And you could see the glow of the flames on the white clouds in the sky at night. And that did make me think a little bit. And the King and Queen visited the East End quite a lot. And in the end, the Germans bombed Buckingham Palace. And the Queen Mother, as she became, she said, well, thank goodness we had to put up with what the people put up with. They haven't exempted us, is what her reaction was. In actual fact, there was talk of the royal family going to Canada. And the Queen said, well, the children can go, but they won't go without the King. The King won't go without me, and I'm staying here. So that was that. They stayed in London.
It was quite frightening at first, but a lot of fun otherwise. We used to have a race to see how quickly we could put on our masks and walk out of the classroom, and then they made us dance about in this van where there was some tear gas or something, and they used to let us flip up the side to smell it.
But didn't the gas pipes smell?
Yes.
Oh.
It is said that you'd be safer if you were in the forces than being stuck on the Thames, because we did have a lot of activity overhead. I think the question used to be, was there going to be an end to this? It was a very long time, 4 years.
We didn't know what to do, you know. We didn't know what to do, whether to go home. Somebody got some beer from somewhere, I think. We had some beer, I know. And
I went up the street, everybody was singing and dancing, and all the street lighting was back on again.
Got on a train and a paddle steamer, got off at Dover, and it was absolutely wonderful. There were all the ladies from Dover dishing out buns and coffee and things. It was super country, I thought.
It was just like somebody lifted a heavy weight off your head and you could dance. And we did. We danced in Oxford Street and all through Kensington and outside Buckingham Palace, and you just hugged complete strangers.
We sort of rallied together again afterwards, you know. It's just a few hours of jollification. It's like, well, the war wasn't over really, you know. It was all this military activity was still going on, you know.
And then, of course, the next day reality breaks in and you see People, marriages broken up because of them serving overseas and the wife going off with an American and this sort of thing, all very human.
The thing I remember at the end of the war was standing at a level crossing to watch a train go through, because the trains were blacked out too. And it was fun to watch this train go by with lights in the windows. Small things like that were wonderful, really.
There was such a feeling of comradeship, and people came from the next street with trays of tea, and everybody was so helpful. There was a wonderful spirit.
So many people were so kind. Although they had nothing, what they did have, they were always willing to share. And there was no locking of doors, and everywhere was just open to anybody.
I've never known anything like it. There was a better community feeling with people in those days than there is now. Funny atmosphere, but a great sort of togetherness. You know, you sit in a train and you just talk to people, but you wouldn't do it now, but you just chatted to people because we were all in the same boat.
The war was, it's not necessary what you read about. War was, in a sense, what you made it, unless you were unfortunate and lived in a place that was heavily bombed.
Some of my happiest memories are through the war, actually, because you met so many different types of people. And I really enjoyed that. I don't say I'd like to see it all over again, though. I like to be peaceful now. Otherwise, the war was the war, and thank God it's over.